Brassai was a Hungarian-born photographer who was originally a journalist in Hungary and Paris, and had experience documenting events and people. His main interest was nightlife. Paris by Night was a 1933 publication which showed his photographs of Paris nightlife. It documented quote-unquote deviance, promiscuity, the conventionally unaccepted or ignored of society, such as sex workers, the homeless, night workers, etc. And Brassai wrote, "This underground world represented Paris, at its most alive, its most authentic." He was interested in documenting the common folk as they had their own kind of society. This photo, for example, of a young prostitute shows this. Her face and the intricacies of her body are blacked out. It's just a silhouette, but it shows the representation of nightlife, that behind the shadows, Paris could really show its complexities and its duality in life. And even though Brassai was mostly famous for showing the grittier aspects of Paris, he was also interested in documenting the upper echelon of it. He included ballet, the opera, intellectuals, such as his contemporaries, Picasso, Dali, Giacometti, and this photograph of Matisse with a model. It showed the sort of activities that the upper class was willing to participate in. Ironically, to be upper class and participate in upper class activity was seen as being cultured, yet there was an effort made to distinguish them from the very culture that took place within the lower class. Early 20th century Paris was a thriving place for lesbian culture. It was actually sometimes nicknamed Paris Lesbos. Le Monocle was one of the most famous lesbian nightclubs in Paris from the 20s to the 40s, when it was shut down due to the Nazi occupation of France. It was named the Monocle because at the time, Sapphic women would wear monocles to signal their sexuality to other Sapphic women. Brassai continued his anthropological documentation of Paris nightlife in his Le Monocle series. Brassai was welcomed in the location, as he was sensitive to his surroundings and thus allowed for subjects to be candid and relaxed around him. This photograph shows the lax nature of his subjects. Lesbian couple at Le Monocle depicts two women sitting at a dinner table, staring off in the same direction. The butch woman sits on the side of her femme, slightly behind her and placing her hand on her elbow. The position is tenderly protective but not overbearing. The femme leans her head on her hand and both elbows rest on the table. And yet, on a personal level, Brassai was distant from his subjects in the location since he was not a lesbian, and this creates a slight barrier between Brassai and his subjects. He's documenting them, but he's not interacting, and this creates a sense of exoticism. It draws attention to the complexities of Paris life without directly participating in Paris life, showing Paris life through the eyes of an outsider looking in, making Paris itself an exotic experience. The likely intended audience for this photograph was non-lesbians. It was meant to answer a question for a curious, heterosexual viewer, and not to serve as representation for an involved gay viewer. In other words, the photograph discusses lesbians, but lesbians are not an active part of the discussion. Part of the discussion is a performance of gender and femininity in this photo, which would appear foreign to the average bourgeois viewer of Brassai's work at the time, but the lesbian's upper-class status acts as an anchor for relatability. The butch addresses femininity as a performance for men by outright rejecting it. She dresses masculinely, has a masculine haircut, and overall makes herself inaccessible to the male gaze by denying anything to gaze at. The femme addresses femininity as a performance for men by subverting it. She dresses and acts femininely, but does so not in service to a man, but solely in service to another woman, again, making herself inaccessible to the male gaze by redirecting herself to the female gaze. Mixing the outsider nature of the LGBT community with the high-class venue and formal attire, Brassai creates this complex relationship between an unconventionally accepted lifestyle, being a lesbian, and a conventionally praised and valued presentation, which is participating in upper society. Many Paris lesbians at the time were aristocratic women who had affairs away from their husbands. This creates a sort of power dynamic between the classes because despite being a minority and being a target for oppression, high-class lesbians were privileged enough to be out as lesbians. And while they still had these uniquely lesbophobic struggles to deal with, their high-class status certainly did not aggravate their oppression. These Le Monocle photographs discuss this kind of intersectionality, combining Brassai's Paris nightlife with Paris elite. They discuss the nuance of social standing coexisting with class standing. In this case, social standing representing their status as lesbians and being seen as quote-unquote deviants in society, and yet their class standing being one of an aristocratic background, being part of the bourgeois. And so with these Le Monocle photographs, Brassai comments on class as being the ultimate divider within Paris nightlife.